Welcome to Open Spaces. From Wyoming Public Radio News, I'm Camila Kadalska. Today, we hear how more businesses are registering in the Cowboy State.
We just saw an enormous wave of people suddenly coming to Wyoming.
And a new business court could help bring more. Plus, Wyoming is ranking better every year on child and family well-being, but more can be done.
While our numbers were really strong, we still have 12,000 kiddos who are living in poverty, so that is something we need to think about.
And how one Kinnear resident is supporting change for people involved in the justice system.
The coach aspect is actually the real secret sauce of why these courses work, because you're getting the student out of their own head, talking with someone they know and trust.
Those stories and more coming up on Open Spaces.
Wyoming Public Media is providing Wyoming and Western wildfire updates on air and now online. Go to wyomingpublicmedia.org and click on Wyoming Wildfire Info. You'll find links to the latest updates on fires around the region, along with information on current air quality conditions, fire restrictions, information on protecting your property, and more. Find it all in one place at wyomingpublicmedia.org.
Welcome to Open Spaces. From Wyoming Public Radio News, I'm Camila Kadalska. Wyoming could be becoming the next Delaware, the top state to register businesses. That's because of low tax rates, cryptocurrency, and now a business or chancery court. Wyoming Public Radio's Hannah Merzbach reports these courts could help companies moving out west.
Look at that beautiful swing. Isn't it perfect?
You're listening to a preview for a mobile golf game where you play as President Trump.
Greatest golf game ever created.
Created by a company registered in Wyoming, an early user of the state's new Chancery Court. It had a business dispute earlier this year.
Never a boring day in Chancery Court.
That's the court's first and only full-time judge, Ben Birmingham, an expert in complex litigation.
I love the law. I love to read the law. I love to write about the law.
The court was created in 2019 to resolve business and trust cases quickly, an average of 116 days versus potentially over a year in district court. Birmingham, who appears to be an even-keeled family man, just got his robe last March.
You solemnly swear.
He says the court has gone from 6 to 48 cases a year. Some are from companies located here, like fireworks sellers whose relationship went up in flames. Many others involve businesses that are registered in Wyoming, but filings don't show if they have physical ties here, like the Trump golf case.
Having a specialized form that can offer predictable, focused, and fair resolution of business disputes has only helped draw companies to the state.
Companies are increasingly filing in Western states because of favorable business laws. Wyoming's the birthplace of LLCs. The state makes money off business filings, but there's no corporate income taxes. Plus, there's a chancery court, which saves businesses time, and time is money. Out west, Wyoming was ahead of the herd starting a court. Utah and Texas followed its lead.
I think a lot of people don't realize that states are competing with each other for corporate domiciles.
Wyoming attorney Matt Kaufman says Delaware has long been the leading state for companies to domicile or register as a business. It's also home to the nation's first chancery court, founded in 1792. But Delaware's status may be slipping.
We just saw an enormous wave of people suddenly coming to Wyoming.
Almost a decade ago, Kaufman says Wyoming started leading the way in blockchain, cryptocurrency, and other digital assets, and businesses took notice.
So instead of people forming companies and going and raising venture capital and just having to default to Delaware because that's what everybody does, suddenly Wyoming is this also acceptable jurisdiction.
Many are Wyoming businesses in name only. Some want headquarters here, but there's not enough workers. Still, in the past few years, Wyoming has overtaken Delaware as the state with the most new businesses per capita. And people like billionaire Elon Musk could be helping.
Elon Musk's $56 billion CEO pay package rejected for a second time by a Delaware judge.
In a phenomenon known as the Delaware exit, or Dexit, more companies left after that 2024 Chancery Court decision. Musk took Tesla to Texas. And Anahit Bashatsen says Nevada got Dropbox and TripAdvisor. She's with a libertarian think tank there.
One critical lapse in judgment can actually drive mass move out of state.
In Nevada, creating a court is on the table. Lawmakers and residents could vote in favor by 2029. But communities would need to buy in. In Wyoming, convincing them is part of Chancery Judge Burningham's job.
I certainly feel a sense of responsibility and a weight on my shoulder. I think I feel that every day.
But the judge says that's what drives him.
To build up this court and help it develop a reputation of deciding things correctly based on the law and deciding them quickly.
From the Trump golf game case to the Wyoming fireworks one, he says everyone deserves a fair resolution. For Wyoming Public Radio, I'm Hannah Merzbach.
In the last year, Wyoming shot up to 12th place on child and family well-being, up from last year when it came in 23rd. That's according to an annual report by the Annie E. Casey Foundation. For years, it's collected data to reflect how families and children are doing across the nation. The Wyoming Women's Foundation has been using this data to help track what's going well and what needs work. Micah Richardson is the Associate Director of Policy at the nonprofit. Wyoming Public Radio's Melody Edwards sat down with Richardson to understand this year's report.
Can you maybe focus on some of the places that we did improve in?
An area that we really did well was our economic well-being domain. While our numbers were really strong, we still have 12,000 kiddos who are living in poverty. So that is something we need to think about. And when we're thinking about those supports that help people put food on their table, that help them access the healthcare they need, it's really important that we're considering those families and recognizing that even though a huge portion of them are working, they are still struggling sometimes to make ends meet, and that those programs and supports are really important. The other area that was interesting is children living in households with a high housing cost burden. We have 25% who are still facing those high cost burdens. And I think that is not news to any of us. I think we're seeing the cost of living in each of our cities and towns rise. And so continuing to think about, are there local programs that can help support workforce living or low-income living? And I know there have been bills in the past that the state could put forward and say, hey, can we do something that sets aside some funding so that cities and towns can really think about development and developing housing for workforce and more attainable housing. And then the other domain that we did really well in was the family and community domain. One area where we are consistently faring better than many of the other states, those children living in high poverty areas. It has been this way for quite a long time, but it dropped even lower, so less than 0.5% of our children are living in those high poverty areas. That is a place to also, I think, as a state, feel good about that we, generally have what we need to help kids and families thrive.
If you have other areas that you feel like that you want to highlight in terms of where there were improvements, I would love for you to elaborate.
So in that health domain, we are always lower on that ranking. While I don't want to celebrate the fact that there were 31 child and teen deaths per 100,000. That is not great. However, it is 5 fewer than where we were before. And any progress we can make on that front, I think is incredibly important. And so when I think about those numbers and knowing from the 2019 and 2023 and then now 2024, those are continuing to slowly go down, we're certainly going to have to watch to know if it's actually a trend or if those numbers are so close that it's just hard to tell. But I do think the focus in the past years on funding that 998 suicide hotline, on thinking about more resources in schools and how we can better support even counselors. That was a bill that came up last year that I will be happy to see continued positive improvement. And just the governor taking initiative to host, mental health forums and things like that are those steps that we have taken helping to move these numbers down. And I hope we can continue to see those numbers drop.
Where are you seeing that children's well-being in our state is declining?
We know it's a national trend that since COVID, the education numbers have dropped. I think it's something that in the K-12 system, we need to think about what kind of steps can we take. And so if we can support the early educational opportunities for families, I think that can go a long way to building the outcomes for our children, which we know then make stronger outcomes for communities, for our workforce, for long-term growth of Wyoming, all of that. And right now, federal level 21st century funding comes from the feds. And so ensuring that that continues to be sent along to our states to support our kiddos. But at the state level, are there opportunities to support these sort of these systems? We know that it's good for education, but it's also good for our workforce.
One of the areas that I noticed that in terms of children's health in the state that is still a problem is obesity. Can you talk a little bit about that issue?
I cannot give you concrete reasons as to why the numbers shift or what they are. The only things I can think of, total speculation, but I think about our rural communities and access to healthy foods in some of these places. What does food access look like in those spaces as well? This could also be a great space for and a great reason to make sure that we are keeping PE in the curriculum at the elementary and the high school levels, and that we are continuing to support outdoor opportunities for Wyoming's youth. I know the tourism board has looked at some of, how can we engage and put more in place and provide funding and that sort of thing. I think that will continue to be important as we think about our families, our youth, but all of us as thinking about building a healthy community.
You had mentioned the fact that lots of our children, or more of our children, are living in homes where their parents are burdened in terms of their housing costs. How does that affect children?
Whether you are living in a house that you own, if you are looking to own a house, or if you are renting. If you are renting and those rental prices, your monthly rent is going up, you are then faced with choices of where do you make sacrifices. My hunch would be that most families, having a roof over their head is going to be number one. Number two might be the food that you put on your table. Then you might be, moving down the list to making sure you are getting the healthcare that you need, et cetera, et cetera. When those housing costs are so high that you are now having to make those hard decisions, that's tough on a family, and it increases the stress of parents. Children feel that stress. It also then directly impacts the other things that a child in a family needs to survive. So, even thinking about transportation and your gas and all of those start to build. It's great to continue renting, but if you're also seeing those rental prices increasing, it's a lose-lose situation. So what kinds of solutions are out there that we as cities and towns and counties can also perhaps look to try to find some of these solutions that address the issue?
I've been speaking with Micah Richardson, who's the Associate Director of Policy at the Wyoming Women's Foundation. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to me.
Thanks so much for taking the time to find out more.
Up next, how national park tourists reacted when prompted to give feedback on exhibits and signs. This is Open Spaces.
Hey there, this is Kelly Trujillo. Join me Saturday mornings for Buffalo Grass, 11 to 1 on listener-supported Wyoming Public Radio. You'll hear the best in bluegrass music, old and new, plus Americana, folk, Western, and even a little bit of Celtic. That's Buffalo Grass, Saturdays at 11 on Wyoming Public Radio.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. Last summer, Signs posted around national parks and monuments asked visitors to use a feedback form to report any exhibits that are, quote, negative about either past or living Americans, or that fail to emphasize the beauty, grandeur, and abundance of landscapes and other natural creatures, end quote. In late May, a lawsuit forced the feds to release the more than 35,000 comments the public sent in the forms. KHOL's Jenna McMurtry dove into the changes, plus the 500 comments submitted between Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. She found that very few people took the prompt seriously. She sat down with KHOL's Sophia Boyd-Flegel to talk about the silly and the serious.
So, Jenna, why did the feds release the comments, and why now?
It all stems from a May 2025 order from Secretary of the Interior Doug Burgum to align with an earlier order from the president called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. Visitors were encouraged to report repairs, needs for improvement, and anything negative that they see about past or present Americans. So I filed a records request in the fall to get responses to the feedback forms for both Yellowstone and Grand Teton. But the Department of the Interior never fulfilled my request. In the end, we got access to the comments anyway after the Sierra Club won a lawsuit this spring. That forced the feds to release the over 35,000 comments made across all national parks and monuments from June of last summer to January 2026. And so for context, over 300 million people visited the parks in the last year.
Got it. So submitted comments made up 0.01% of visits. What did they write in about?
The comments range from the satirical to the supportive. Some criticize the Trump administration for pulling resources from the national parks, and others show gratitude for the Park Service. There are personal shout-outs for favorite park rangers and calls for the feds to pay rangers better. In the last year and a half, the Park Service faced mass firings and a government shutdown. Grand Teton and Yellowstone haven't seen another round of sweeping cuts, but the fear that more are on the way is still felt among federal workers. Many commenters also asked for more history, not less. And then there's about 13% of responses that focus on the practical. Some asked for improvements like cleaner toilets at Grand Teton or better road maintenance.
Interesting. So did anyone actually report a sign with information that was, and I'm looking at the language here, negative about either past or living Americans?
There was one comment that expressed disappointment in a sign, but here's what it says. Quote, I was disappointed in a sign that said, be careful, bear in area. I was careful, but I did not see a bear. I expected to see a bear and was completely let down. Another comment seems to joke about the park's so-called Cathedral Mountain Group, saying it, quote, inappropriately disparages Gothic architecture. And then there's another comment that, also apparently in jest, calls the French meaning of Grand Teton offensive. It says, quote, this mountain range refers to a woman's large breasts and is plastered all over every sign in the park, offending my sensibilities.
Okay, so not exactly reports on negative depictions of American history.
Right. And overall, there was overwhelming support for the current history exhibits in Grand Teton. Several people even asked for more information, especially when it comes to the tribes that call the Tetons their ancestral homeland. That includes the Eastern Shoshone, Bannock, Blackfeet, Crow, Gros Ventre, and Nez Perce nations.
With all this in mind, has anything actually changed at Grand Teton or in Yellowstone?
I haven't found any reports from Yellowstone. I went to Grand Teton's Visitor Center right after the order came out, and again when they reopened this spring. From that, I've only known of the removal of one sign. It's the same sign that in January the Washington Post reported had been removed. That was based on a leaked document. The sign had additional information on an earlier settler, Gustavus Cheney Doane, and told a fuller picture of his past. Without the placard, visitors now miss that Doane had participated in the Marias Massacre of 1870 when the U.S. Army killed 170 Blackfeet women and children. The sign had said that Doane, quote, wrote fondly about the attack and bragged about it for the rest of his life.
Is anyone pushing back against that sign's removal?
Yeah, Tom Rogers is one. He's an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation. His Blackfeet name is One Who Rides His Horse East. He's speaking out against the removal of the sign that had mentioned the violence Doane waged against his ancestors.
Gustavus Doane is a war criminal. He is not to be honored, and his full history needs to be told. As Native people, we are so sick of the myth-making of this country. Manifest Destiny That is nothing more than genocide cloaked in the divine.
In 2022, Rogers helped rename Mount Doan in Yellowstone to First Peoples Mountain after a decade of advocacy. So then I also asked the Department of Interior about its reason for changing the sign. A spokesperson emailed back that several other flagged exhibits will remain unchanged for now, but that the changes intend to ensure parks will tell the full and accurate story of American history, including subjects that were minimized or omitted under the Biden administration. Rogers doesn't agree that that's what's going on, and neither does Molly Blake. She's a co-founder of Save Our Signs, a national movement that's bringing social science librarians and park visitors together to track what's changed.
We decided to invite the public into the process and have them take pictures of national park signs so that there would be a record of what these signs said, should they be censored or altered.
Since launching last fall, she says citizen historians have sent in over 14,000 pictures across nearly 500 parks and monuments.
Well, is anyone going directly to Congress or the Trump administration?
Yeah, so the National Parks Conservation Alliance advocates on behalf of the parks to Congress. Alan Spears is the Senior Director for Cultural Resources. He testified to Congress in February.
And when it comes to American history, we want the full story because, yes, we can handle the truth.
Spears is also lobbying to counter what he says is the Fed's attempt to downplay George Washington's ownership of slaves at Independence National Historic Park. He says remembering negative parts of history in the parks is part of critical thinking and learning from the past.
And what we have right now at Grand Teton and Grand Canyon and at Independence Hall in Philadelphia and scores of other sites throughout the national park system is an effort to sanitize American history.
So we're seeing that the bulk of the comments submitted to the feds are part of this bigger movement resisting the removal of stories from federal spaces.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing your reporting.
You're welcome.
Water is precious in the West. Every drop counts. And for the Southern Paiute people, water is life, and it must be protected. That's the mission of Captain Paiute, the main character of an Indigenous comic book series. For the Mountain West News Bureau, Jimmy Romo has more on Captain Paiute and other Indigenous comic book characters.
When Theo So was a child, he found his father's stash of comic books from the Vietnam War in an old shed. He was fascinated, but even in his youth, there was something he couldn't overlook. As an enrolled member of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe, he didn't see himself positively represented in those pages.
If they're in a book, if they're in a comic, they were sidekicks, or they were, in the background, or they were the wild savages, the Wild West.
Before the modern era of comic books, which started in the 80s, many Indigenous characters were stereotypical representations. It wasn't until a friend handed him a new comic book with Indigenous characters on the cover, Tribal Force, that he finally saw himself reflected in the drawings.
That book right there relit the fire of me doing what I wanted to do, because I didn't see any Native Americans that had their own titles.
It was then that Theo started developing elements of the character that would become Captain Paiute. Sitting in an art class at Rancho High School, So would draw superheroes with his classmates.
The very first version was very Batman influenced. He had a big cape, big cowl on his head, and big old feather coming out the back of his head, and he carried a tomahawk. Very stereotypical Native American.
But then So found the power of Pa, or water in Paiute, to make his Indigenous character extremely powerful. So then tried to pursue a career in comics, but grew frustrated with the mixed feedback he'd get from publishers. He eventually shelved the project for the better part of 15 years. However, during that time, comic book publishers began to place greater emphasis on diversity and inclusion in their comics. Marvel Comics in particular pushed for not just diverse characters, but also diverse people behind the scenes. That includes other Native American characters like Daredevil's Echo. She's deaf and has Choctaw roots.
It's important for kids to see themselves represented in comic books. It's also important for kids to see the other represented in comic books.
That's Ben Morris, a lecturer of journalism and media studies at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Before that, he worked at Marvel for about a decade. Morris also grew up reading comic books, and in many ways, they were his first encounters with minority communities while growing up in his predominantly white suburban neighborhood.
I think for a long time you had primarily white male storytellers. And it's those people trying to encapsulate a story that's not fully theirs. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think you really need that first-person perspective.
And telling stories from an indigenous perspective is exactly what convinced So to pull Captain Paiute off the shelf in 2010.
I wanted something for our kids, our youth, the native youth to look up to. You know, there's a superhero who looks like me, lives on the reservation like I do, and actually knows what goes on here.
Captain Paiute grew up on Indian country, on a fictional reservation called the Las Vegas Valley Paiute Reservation, and works as a hydrologist at his tribe and visits other reservations. He also has the power to harness Pa, Mother Earth's power to fight villains such as Bad Medicine, a witch doctor that comes from a fenced-off grave at a tribal cemetery. So far, So has published several issues of his Captain Paiute comic book and distributed them throughout the Las Vegas Valley and at comic book conventions. And when he hands them out, he gets to see indigenous children get excited.
Kids who like, oh wow, this is cool looking, this is awesome. And it's, for me, that's the ultimate kudos right there. That's the ultimate pat on the back, as the kids.
For So, he hopes the ultimate takeaway is that Native Americans need to be their own storytellers, not Hollywood. Jimmy Romo, KNPR News.
A Fremont County resident has found an effective program to help people involved in the justice system. That story up next on Open Spaces.
This time on the Modern West. Part 1 of our new series, Mountain Migrations, a season about how Westerners are always on the move, including our wildlife.
12 individual bears in a year, and then 16, and then 20, and finally within probably the last 3 years, I can't really even keep track of the individual bears that I see in a year.
Living with Grizzlies. Find it under podcasts at wyomingpublicmedia.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Sponsored by OSM Construction.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. From Wyoming Public Radio, I'm Camila Kadalska. If you're driving through Fremont County, you might pass through the tiny town of Kinnear. Clifford Fuel lives a few turns off the highway and runs a business called Stay Free Forever out of his home office. He provides cognitive behavioral health courses for adults and young people, especially those involved in the justice system. They cover topics like anger management or vaping, and the DUI courses are often assigned by a judge. Wyoming Public Radio's Hannah Haberman sat down with Fuel in his backyard to learn more.
You actually worked in the world of journalism for a long time and then became a corrections officer. What about that experience inspired you to start providing these courses?
I needed health benefits, and I had been let go from a job in Colorado as ad director. I humbled myself to apply with a state prison, because when the economy is going tanking like it was in 2008, corrections tends to do very well with hiring. I was face-to-face with inmates. I didn't have any intrinsic judgment toward them. In fact, I had a lot of empathy for where they were. And they really pointed out in the academy in Tucson that you're not there to punish these people. You're there to facilitate their incarceration. And that means be decent, be firm, be fair, be consistent, keep them safe, keep yourself safe, keep the public safe, and that's kind of the end of the story.
I'd love to hear a little bit about where these courses came from, where this style of course came from.
The guy who founded the American Community Corrections Institute, a man named Larry Lloyd, passed away a few years ago. But Larry was an accountant who had a passion for psychology, and he came up with a psychology-based behavioral traffic safety course that he was convinced would help people stop speeding, stop reoffending. So he created this course, and they started offering these courses to people, and lo and behold, they stopped reoffending. and the courts wanted more. So he developed a bad check course, because back in the 70s, bad checks were still a big deal. And it was really effective. He started adding on other courses, theft, shoplifting, DUI, domestic violence, sex offender. So the courses are really useful for doing that, surfacing issues that people need to think about.
What kind of folks are you working with? How are you getting connected to them? Who is taking these courses?
Most often it's from the circuit courts in Lander and Colorado. Sometimes it's the prosecuting attorney, sometimes it's the public defender on a pretrial basis saying, I want you to take this course so when we go into court you'll have something to show for yourself, a completion certificate. Because I have prevention intervention courses for middle school, junior high, high school, all the way up to these courses that are for adult offenders or adult, as my daughter says, justice-involved individuals. Most of the time, I would say I'm dealing with a 20 to 30-year-old male or female who has a DUI or got caught stealing from Walmart or got into a bar fight, got into a fight at home.
Most of these courses take about 11 to 15 hours, and students have about a month to complete them. And they also require a coach. Tell me a little bit about that coaching relationship and how that plays into the program.
The coach aspect is actually the real secret sauce of why these courses work, because you're getting the student out of their own head, talking with someone they know and trust. And in every evaluation almost that I get from both coach and student, I hear a comment or read a comment that is something to the effect of, wow, this is the first time my mom and I have talked on this level in forever. Or maybe it's their boss, or it's their cousin, or it's their counselor. It's getting the student talking about this stuff, real stuff, with someone. They're not just completing an online course or just writing in a workbook. They're actually having to verbalize it. And I think that's where the synapses start firing and new connections are made.
In Fremont County, you've been providing these courses, at least the DUI courses, since 2018, and you've been tracking the courses and some of the outcomes. How many people have taken this course in Fremont County, and what are some of the results you've seen?
We had 176 people in Fremont County assigned to the DUI workbook course or the e-learning course. Of those, 14.2%, that's 25 total people, in the 3 years after they completed the course, reoffended with a DUI. So that's like an 85% success rate. It really puts wind in my sails to keep doing what I'm doing, because anytime you can take 151 people off the DUI, the practicing DUI list, out there driving while intoxicated, that's good for everybody.
You've also got a podcast, the Stay Free Forever podcast. Tell me a little bit about that and who you bring on the show and what your goal is.
If I see someone do really stellar work on their online course or in their workbook, I will invite them. I say, hey, would you like to do a podcast interview and talk about how you came to redirect your life? And there's some great episodes. I've done 18 so far. But there's also people like a judge, like a former Wyoming Highway Patrolman, the guy who's the president of the American Community Corrections Institute. So anyone who has something to contribute, where someone who needs help, who needs direction as to how to turn their life around, they can tune in, download it for free, and get 40 minutes to an hour's worth of been there, done that from someone. And I think that's really good for kind of like free therapy, although I'm not a therapist.
You've obviously spent a lot of time interacting with the justice system in Wyoming, on the Wind River Reservation. Are there changes that you think could take place that could help those systems improve, that could help support the people who are in those systems?
I'll use the Wind River Travel Court as an example of something that changed for the better. My courses cost $110. People can make two payments of $57.50, so they're an extra $5 for the privilege. At the Wind River Tribal Court, they allow me to say to the student, hey, once you pay for this course and complete it, they will knock $110 off your fines. That would be something that I think could be looked at, because fines can be overdone. If there's a willingness to let people know that, hey, complete this course, show us your certificate, and we'll drop your fines by the cost of the course, I thought that was a really civil thing to do.
What do you hope these courses look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road?
I hope they're in many more languages. Right now they're in English and Spanish. Every one of my courses is available online in Spanish. I have 6 of the workbooks that are available in Spanish. That covers a lot, but we have such a vast number of people whose English is not their first language who get in trouble and who need help, just like anyone else does, who need to reassess their thinking and their risky thinking and behavior. So other languages would be a big deal.
I've been talking with Clifford Fuel, who provides cognitive behavior courses throughout Wyoming and also has a podcast called Stay Free Forever. Clifford, thanks so much for making the time to talk.
Thank you.
This year marks the centennial celebration of Route 66. A recent AAA survey shows more than a third of adults are planning road trips to visit the Main Street of America in 2026. When Gabriel Pietroza traveled in Arizona for the Mountain West News Bureau, he discovered the odd origins of a stretch of the Mother Road.
Get your kicks on Route 66.
Long before all the neon diners, gas stations, and motels dotted this humming highway, the U.S. Army first charted a course along the modern-day path of Route 66, surveying Arizona's high desert terrain for a wagon trail with an unlikely companion: camels.
What they do is they throw their cut up on you. So it's not like you see in the cartoons where they spit a little bit. They're accurate with it, up to 20 feet.
That's Freddie Andrea handling a dromedary camel named Crockett at the Phoenix Zoo.
Maybe he'll go, "Rrr." They sound a little bit like when a lion growls, under his breath kind of, or maybe a little bit like Chewbacca.
And nearly 2 centuries ago, close to a dozen Middle Eastern cameleers helped ex-naval officer turned explorer Edward Fitzgerald Beale lug a caravan of camels through the arid American Southwest in the 1850s. Among them was Syrian Haji Ali, who locals affectionately called High Jolly. Future Confederate President Jefferson Davis, who at that time served as U.S. Secretary of War, was behind the idea to create a camel corps. Davis even secured money from Congress to fund this pre-Civil War experiment by importing more than 70 camels from Northern Africa and the Ottoman Empire.
I mean, they're serious about this. They were dead serious about making this work.
Tucson native Natalie Cook is a political geographer at Syracuse University.
And so Beale sort of takes on this assignment, and he became a true believer.
Missouri-based camel ride manager Chester Taylor, who owns the camels at Phoenix Zoo, is convinced this long-legged mammal could have become an enduring symbol of the West, like how the horse is seen today.
It's definitely a better working animal. It lives longer, it's stronger, it eats less, but the horses were afraid of them, and as cowboy Americans, they were not super into the Bedouins.
He's talking about nomadic Arab tribesmen who were hired by the U.S. Army to join this journey. Neither the horses nor indigenous peoples would have encountered camels. It was something the Army was even counting on, says Cook.
How do we scare off the indigenous people who are resisting our taking over of their land and resources?
Beale's wagon road became obsolete, but his camel-plotted blueprint really paved the way for gas-powered automobiles driving Route 66 nearly 7 decades later. Still, this ancient corridor was already well-traveled by indigenous peoples centuries prior. Sherry Rupert is CEO of the American Indigenous Tourism Association. She and her group designed an all-indigenous guidebook ahead of the Route 66 centennial.
Because prior to it becoming the Mother Road, it was travel routes for many of our tribes to trade with each other.
Well, it goes through St. Louis,
Today, more than half of the 2,400-mile-long interstate traverses Indian country.
Gallup, New Mexico, Flagstaff, Arizona, don't forget Winona, Kingsman, Barstow,
including the reservations of over 24 tribes, from the Wallapai to the Navajo. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Gabriel Pietrorazio.
Get your kicks on Route 66. Get your kicks on Route 66. Get your kicks on Route 66. Get your kicks on Route 66.
Up next, we find out about Eleanor Prince, who moved to Wyoming in the 1950s and started one of the nation's longest-running equestrian schools. This is Open Space.
Can't have the radio on all day but want to keep up to date with Wyoming news? Then check out our new daily podcast, the Wyoming Debrief. Get daily news around Wyoming and test your knowledge of the Cowboy State with some trivia. All of that in under 10 minutes. Find Wyoming Debrief wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. Pamela Galbraith has published a new book titled The Scent of Horses, Hay, and Old Barns, the story of Eleanor Prince, intrepid American horsemanship educator. The biography is set in southeast Wyoming. Wyoming Public Radio's Grady Kirkpatrick spoke with Galbraith about the book and her inspiration for telling the story of Eleanor Prince.
The inspiration for writing the book was Eleanor Prince and her story and her abilities and strengths coming from the East in a rather elite, comfortable setting and coming to Wyoming because she is so interested in getting horses and making a life of horses. The story was just so moving to me. That's how I latched on to her and decided to write this book, her biography.
Tell us about Ellie's background, where she grew up in Boston, and how she started her love of horses.
She started her love of horses on pretty much the first page of the book. Very briefly, she was 4 years old, visiting with her family, and she wandered off to a buggy, and there was a horse that was well known for being cantankerous, for bucking. And when her parents found her finally, she was underneath the horse, right by his hooves, and the horse was calm and she was calm. After that, it was in her blood. Mm-hmm. She just loved horses, and she borrowed horses, and she used that term a lot when she was visiting her grandfather in New Hampshire. When she was in college, she read every book she could find in the bookstores, at the college library. She came to Wyoming in 1956 and rented what she called a small cabin, loved that little cabin just directly below or at the base of Gel Mountain, and found horses by asking people if their very ill horse, their very sickly horse, their malnourished horse that they were going to part with, if she could buy the horse. And she had hardly any money. She came out with very little. And she bought those horses and started working with them and training them and just doing everything with them. And then she met up with a lot of military who were stationed here And they had children, and all the children wanted to learn to ride horses.
Mm-hmm.
So Ellie said, I can do that.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Boy, could she.
Could she ever? And so she took this small group of women, almost all of them I was able to interview, and taught them how to ride horses for real.
Talk a little bit about Ellie's approach to horsemanship, and it was far beyond just riding.
It was. Ellie believed in total communication between horse and rider. She believed that if you just got on a horse and went, you were not riding because the horse was not in any kind of connection with you. She had a term that I don't know how many times it is mentioned in the book called ground up, which meant that she wanted her riders to get to know their horse that they were going to be riding, whether they were in a class or they had bought a horse. They had to work with that horse, checking its teeth. I didn't know you could put your hand in a horse's mouth and survive, but she taught that. Saddling, bridling came after currying the horse, working with the horse, checking the horse all around, loving the horse, petting the horse, all of this on-the-ground work.
Mm-hmm.
And some people would probably get very tired of that, but she insisted that you didn't know your horse until you did that.
Along with her work on the ranch, she supplemented her income by teaching at Harmony Elementary School between Laramie and Jelm. That was, I guess, the late 50s, and she certainly had a knack for teaching and inspiring her students.
She did. And as she said to me when we were talking one day, you know, teaching is no different from riding a horse. And as a teacher myself, I somewhat agreed with her because you have to know your pupils so well. You have to know what encourages them, what triggers them, how they work, because she was an artist, and she would watch a student trying to draw perhaps a horse, and she would see that the student was coming at it from this angle when maybe this angle might be a little easier. So she was a born teacher because of her born ability to work with horses.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a number of students who just adored her. And I have met some of those students, and they corroborate that they thought she was the greatest.
I expect a lot of folks would be interested in this story, especially people who love horses, those who appreciate ranching in the West, and people living in southeast Wyoming. It really provides an interesting historical perspective on this part of the state, beginning in the late 50s and right on up to the first part of the 21st century. But I think the story is pretty universal.
It is universal. And interestingly, Ellie had students from every state in the Union, except for some strange reason, Arkansas.
Okay.
She also had a woman who came over from the Hawaiian Islands. She had a woman who came from the UK. And I talk mainly about women, but she had men who came from various places to take lessons from her. So it's really a larger than Wyoming story.
Oh, yeah. She became renowned in horsemanship nationwide.
She did. She really did. She had 3 books that she published. The first one was on basic horsemanship. The other 2 books dealt with everything from breeding to learning how to take care of your saddle. Mm-hmm. And those books, published by Simon & Schuster, were all over.
Talking with Pamela Galbraith about the book, In the Scent of Horses, Hay and Old Barns, the story of Eleanor Prince. And what do you think Eleanor Prince's legacy and impact was over the years?
I think her legacy is her personality. She could blend with anyone. She could blend in any situation. She was just a remarkable, strong, amazing woman who I believe her story deserves a place in Wyoming's history. I think her legacy as well, in a more narrow approach, is that she was able to combine dressage riding, which some people call ballet of horses, cavalry, Western, Eastern, and help riders be able to use all of those or just one of those. But she was not just an English rider. Mm-hmm. She was all of these. And she also helped others if they wanted to breed horses. She was a good businesswoman in so many ways and just has, I think, given Wyoming so very much.
The book is titled The Scent of Horses, Hay, and Old Barns, The Story of Eleanor Prince, Intrepid American Horsemanship Educator, by Pamela Galbraith. Thank you very much, Pamela Galbraith. It's been a pleasure, and what a story.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Open Spaces. The entire show and all the stories you heard here can be found on our website at wyomingpublicmedia.org. It can also be found wherever you get your podcast. And we post all our stories on the station's social media platforms. Those include Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X, and Blue Sky. Melody Edwards and I edited this episode. Melody was also our audio producer. Ivy Engel is our digital producer, and Cody Hume, our social media manager. Open Spaces is a production of Wyoming Public Radio News.